former Waunakee veterinarian faces several charges for mistreating animals.
According to court documents, Dr. Wesley Arnett is accused of abusing several dogs and a cat while being treated at his Waunakee veterinary clinic. We want to warn you, some of the details of the allegations may be disturbing.
NBC 15's Colton Molesky spoke with pet owners who go to this clinic. So, Colton, what reaction did they have to these allegations?
John, Maria, everyone I spoke with was shocked at the charges against Arnett. In the criminal complaint obtained by NBC 15, he is accused by employees of kicking a dog with enough force to send it into a wall or hitting animals hard enough to, quote, cause an audible sound.
Yeah, I gasped.
When I first read this, I was in total shock.
Two patrons of the Waunakee Veterinary Clinic shared their reactions to the news of animal abuse allegations.
I mean, I never not trusted them with our animals.
Brenda McMiller says she has taken her pets to the clinic for over 30 years, now upset to read about the investigation on social media.
I think the biggest thing I was disappointed in is that I had to read about it on Facebook. That was my biggest disappointment. I would have liked to have gotten a private message or something.
According to Dane County court documents, the investigation includes multiple accounts from clinic employees. It details animal abuse dating back to May of 2021, which include kicking and hitting animals, as well as accusing Dr. Wesley Arnett of drinking on the job.
To be completely honest, I thought, has the man developed a brain tumor? Because what I was reading was not the man that took care of my animals.
Brenda Davies says she started taking her pets there in 2004 and was also surprised by the allegations. Darby and McMiller still would take their animals to the clinic because they trust the rest of the staff.
Because I know everybody that works there, that this is not them.
I know that the people that I've worked with that are still there, I have complete faith in them.
Now, the clinic declined an interview, saying in a statement the team is, quote, emotionally distraught by the charges. The DA's office also declined an interview, and the Waunakee Police Department failed to get back to me on an interview request. Arnett is scheduled to be in court next Monday. In studio, Colton Molesky, NBC 15 News.
Now, according to a social media post from the clinic, Arnett is no longer an owner or associated with that clinic. The court documents show the allegations happened when he was the owner. If your pet is involved in the investigation, the clinic has notified you already.